Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to episode 45, I think, of the ESG Show. And today we're talking about ESG getting started. And before I get started, I want to very, very quickly tell you about tie-in we're doing with ESG Disclose and the Knowledge Hub. We've done, as I say, I think it's 45 episodes of the ESG Show now. So it's roughly 45 hours of content. And it would be fantastic to think that you're all going to go away after the show and go onto YouTube and watch every episode back to back. And in fact, I've put the link to YouTube in the comment sections if you're interested. But I have a funny feeling that not all of you are going to do that. So what I've been busy doing is breaking it down into clips and organizing it around a menu system, which is appearing on the Knowledge Hub. And there's a link to that in the comments as well. Anyway, let's push on. That's the, by the way, if you're interested, that's the YouTube thing. There's and the links in the comments and the Knowledge Hub. Okay. So under the EU's GDPR, there's this idea of privacy by design and default. Now, I think there's an ESG equivalent, ESG by design. It means building ESG considerations into a new product or service or process at the outset. So ESG is their foundations. And I like that idea, but let's run with a construction analogy. When building a house, you need to build the foundations first. So that is the analogy with ESG by design. But before you build the foundations, you need to find your builders. So returning to ESG, creating your experts, assigning ownership. But before you do that, you need planning permission, and for that a plan, and you need an architect. But before even that, you need to know what and why. What is the purpose of this house? Is it for a family of 5 or a single person, or maybe a hotel? It's all obvious, of course, but I think maybe we need to start with an analogy like that when asking the question, how do you get started with ESG? So let's meet the guests. And on the show today is Petter Bind. Hello, Petter. How are you today? And where in the world are you dialing in from?
Hi, I'm joining you from Geneva, Switzerland.
Geneva, Switzerland. Okay. And for those people who are interested in football, you might know that Switzerland are playing England on Saturday. So Petter and I are not friends at the moment, but once it's over, we'll be buddies again. Is that right?
That's right.
So Petter Bind is the founder of Bind International Management based in Geneva, which does consulting and advisory work in strategy, digital and ESG, as well as turnaround interim change management. He's the author of the recently published book, The ESG Sprint, 7 Steps to Get Your Business Quickly on Track for a Sustainable Future. He has broad international management experience and has successfully led a number of strategic change processes, including turnarounds, restructuring, M&A, performance improvement, customer experience, digital technology implementation. He has management and board experience from many countries, including Switzerland, Norway, Sweden, UK, USA, Mexico, Colombia, Brazil, Argentina, Turkey, India, Australia, and New Zealand. My goodness, that's quite the... You've been traveling around, Petter. Can you tell me a little bit about your book, The ESG Sprint?
Yes, absolutely, with pleasure. The ESG Sprint is really born from the recognition that many companies go around this topic of ESG, knowing that you have to do something, but maybe not knowing exactly where to start. You're spending time and resources, sometimes getting lost in all the regulatory requirements that are popping up and changing all the time. Sometimes thinking that it's all about compliance, which sort of gets you a bit stuck. Often initiating projects and assigning task forces or what have you, but not really having a clear direction for where you want to go with this. And for that reason, also not really getting to real tangible and practical progress. So what we basically concluded here was that we need to take this, approach this with a more kind of practical, on more practical business terms, and that's where the sprint concept comes in, and the sprint approach as a way of accelerating a problem-solving process, really. And it's a structured, it's an accelerated process. it's about gaining first a shared understanding of the challenges that you're facing and seeing the implications of that specifically for your industry and your business. And you're identifying the most critical risks and opportunities, setting out the ambition level, deciding where you want to be, and charting the course to get there. And while you're aligning with your stakeholders along the way. Many of your viewers will be familiar with the design sprint concept, which is really the sort of origin of this kind of sprint thinking, of those accelerated problem solving processes. And some of the really key points about this is that you really need to address this as business risks and business opportunities. And it's about how you both engage with your customers, attract talents, qualify for financing, and attract investors, and so on. And it also really needs to be integral to your business strategy. It's about it's not something you can delegate or outsource to some part of your organization or some task force or team somewhere in the organization. It really needs to have ownership from the top. It needs to be something you regard as part of your core strategy. And it's really not just about doing good. It's about securing the future of your business. So that's what the ESG sprint is really all about.
Okay, thank you very much, Petter. Also joining us today is Robin. Robin Boosted. Have I said that correctly?
Boosted, yes, indeed.
Oh, I have. Good. And where are you dialing in from today?
I'm in a rainy Lörrach in southern Germany.
Right. Okay. And presumably it's raining there at the moment.
It is a very rainy day right now. Yes.
Is it? Okay. Bad luck. Right. So Robin has combined his love. Let me call Robin up. Robin has combined his love for nature with entrepreneurship and sustainability consultancy. He includes an adventure travel and retail business, launching a responsible fashion brand, coaching more than 1,000 businesses in sustainability reporting, and creating the world's highest and hardest hiking route, the Great Himalaya Trail. My goodness, he has written 6 books, including the soon-to-be-launched ESG reporting manual, and makes maps of the Himalayas for fun. Wow. Maps of the Himalayas for fun. That sounds interesting, to put it mildly.
I love maps, Peter. I love the way that they can take you to somewhere else on planet Earth without having to leave your chair.
Fair enough. And so tell me a little bit about the ESG reporting manual. It hasn't been published yet. I believe it's being published in a couple of months' time. Is that right?
Indeed, as they say, it's still in the oven, but it's not far away. And I'm hoping that it will be out and readily available come the autumn, certainly by September. Let's see how we go. Fingers crossed.
Okay, and what's it about? I mean, it's about ESG reporting, I assume.
Yeah. I tried to get a title that was pretty self-explanatory. So the byline for the book is that it's more than 500 tips and tricks to help folks really complete a meaningful GHT report. Over the years, I've worked with many different organizations to improve their sustainability and report their progress, and transition basically to try and become a more responsible organization. But it seems to me that in the last few years, there's been this sort of massive amount of legislation and regulation around the world. And people have really kind of got a bit stuck, as Peter has mentioned, on the compliance aspect of ESG reporting, when actually it's about practical action. It's about impact management. So I figured that write a manual to help people fulfill their compliance needs, and that will give them time to actually do really important stuff, which is get on with those actions, start trying to reduce negative impacts on communities, on the planet, whatever, and at the same time try to create positive outcomes. So I also hope that I've written a book that's going to stay on people's desks. You know, it's not something that's going to get consigned to a shelf. The people are going to buy it and use it and then come back to it again and again and again, to start working on their long-term plans and to help really develop positive impacts and create more resilient businesses.
All right, thanks for that, Robin. Well, see you again shortly. On the show, also we have Matthew. Hi, Matthew, and you're in the US, aren't you today?
I am. I am on the East Coast US in Pennsylvania, where it is wonderfully sunny today, but probably too hot.
It's cloudy, but not rainy here today. Okay, so Matthew Secco is a sustainability global black belt at Microsoft, working on the commercial side of the topic. He's very active on LinkedIn and has written a book called ESG Mindset, which is a primer for organizations to help them mainstream the topic. So, Matthew, what's an ESG black belt, and does it involve karate?
It absolutely does not. So it's an interesting title for sure. My role here at Microsoft is really on the commercial side of ESG. So I talk to mostly the world's largest companies all over the place and our partners. And I largely talk to them about not only environmental accounting, which we have a first party product for, but also data and a little bit of what Robin said, trying to move from that reporting piece into using technology for some kind of outcome or action. So yeah, there's a bunch of different types of global black belts at Microsoft. There are data and AI black belts. There's some for our collaboration stack. I happen to be a sustainability global black belt. No karate left.
Okay, all right. And so tell me a little bit about the book.
Yeah, sure. So I came into ESG from the perspective of capital markets, where ESG was kind of forged from with the UN. And when I first learned about it, I was looking around and thinking, I was reflecting back upon my own time supporting IT and corporates. And I realized that ESG had always kind of been underpinning my career, but nobody ever said ESG to me. And so I started talking to companies about it outside of my remit in capital markets. And I would say to them, hey, do you know what ESG is? I think the way that you're talking about these issues to me is really ESG. Have you thought about it this way? And they would say to me, oh man, no, isn't ESG about saving the world or some sort of impact? And I would explain to them what it is and kind of do this education. And so over time, I realized that nobody had ever really gone to companies and said, hey, there's a whole group of investors and potentially stakeholders who are thinking about your business in this way. And you should probably think about your business in this way. So I decided to write a book to try to get companies to shift the way that they're thinking about their business from strictly financials, quarterly reporting, which we have here in the US, and into this kind of long-term resilient mindset. And when I talk to companies today, I was just on a call yesterday, they even say this really requires a specific mindset. So I think I kind of hit on something there.
Okay, thank you. Well, thanks for that, Matthew. And I might like to point out at this stage that we've got all our guests are authors today. So how about that for expertise? I thought we could get straight to the point now and start talking about getting started. And Petter, I believe that you think we need to start with a definition.
Yes, absolutely. I think that how you define the whole sort of topic of ESG is going to be very critical for how you will succeed with it also. And I think it is the case among many businesses today that you define it as maybe a compliance issue, maybe a reporting issue, maybe because you're sort of overwhelmed with all these kind of new things that are coming in from all sides, and maybe especially in Europe with new regulations, new directives, new expectations, different requirements for different kinds of businesses and so on. But I believe it's absolutely critical that you define this in terms of business risks and business opportunities. That's what it's really about, and that's why I'm also so insisting on this being an integral part of your strategy and so on. But if you see this as business risk and business opportunity, you will be dealing with compliance. All these things are part of the risks that you are confronted with. And there are risks of different types. There are many of them boil down to financial risks at the end of the day, but they can be physical risks. They can be risks about not doing what is required or whatever it is. But there's a whole set of risks, and you need to define which ones are the most significant for you and your business. Then there is a whole set of opportunities as well, and many of them, if you take the approach of thinking that it's all about compliance, for instance, then you kind of lose out on the opportunity side of things. There will be new opportunities in how you deal with your customers, how you attract talent, how you secure green financing, how you are being attractive for investors, and so on and so forth. And so at the end of the day, for me, it's very important, define it as business risks and business opportunities, and start from there, understand that, and move on from there.
Okay, thanks for that. And now, so Matthew, and indeed Robin, I'll come to you first, Matthew, then I'll hand over to Robin. I think you feel that measuring ESG is an important part of the starting point.
Yeah, there's definitely an interesting starting point at the reporting and the disclosures, because it's the one thing that companies are kind of doing because they have to do, right? So if you haven't started ESG, chances are somebody in your organization is looking at it because there's a regulation somewhere that's requiring you to disclose some sort of information. But what I'd say is, I see a lot of companies using the reporting to just do the reporting and not actually move into what Robin said earlier, again, the action, or to take that information and figure out internally what is material, what is in my long-term interest out of all these metrics, what is the data telling me? And I write about this in the book, because what ends up happening is companies pass that reporting data out to external stakeholders very, very often without bringing it back in and turning it into a starting point to say, well, you know what? We just figured out all of these metrics. I kind of had a theory that maybe as a steel manufacturer, energy was going to be a big carbon emissions issue for us, and that we should probably figure out a transition plan. But this data really tells me how that is and why that is, and really informs the strategy to kind of kick this whole process off. So I do think reporting, gathering the data can be a starting point, but you have to kind of pull that data back in and analyze it in order to inform the strategy.
Okay. And Matthew, I beg your pardon, Robin. I think that the word why lurks in your idea of where we need to start with the ESG.
Look, I think first of all, Mike, you've got 3 ESG professionals in this call who are converts already. So, we've already sucked the why pill and come away changed people. But the vast majority of the marketplace has. And the why is going to remain compliance, probably for a significant number of players for quite some time. And that's the reality. But the compliance is a springboard. As both Peter and Matthew have said, it's a springboard into a whole realm of different decision-making tools and different perspectives. And when you get access to the data that ESG can create, well then, personally, and I'm sure I speak to these guys as well, you're actually beginning to make better decisions, and you're beginning to look at the environment and the space in which your organization is operating from a different perspective. And that's a good thing. The more perspectives that you can look at a problem or look at an issue, the more thoroughly you understand it, and the better you're going to be able to deal with it. So there's client and market expectations, there's supplier expectations, there's finances and investors and all of the different marketplace levers that are going to be able to help benefit your business to become more resilient in the future. But really what we're talking about is continuous improvement. How are you going to have a better business in 5 years' time or in 10 years' time? How are you going to be able to stand up among your peers and actually say that you are doing the right thing? Okay? This is really what ESG is about. And I think the sooner the organizations begin to understand that the speed at which we've seen ESG come into the decision-making place that we are rapidly seeing it becoming a pretty well a standard, a hygiene factor almost. We're talking about hierarchy of needs. The people, your customers, your suppliers, they're expecting you to have a substantial ESG commitment. So whether it's actually being why, good conscience, we would like to think so. For us, yes, I think it is so. But I hope that we can actually see it become so in the next sort of 5 years, 10 years, something like that. Maybe sooner if we're lucky.
Okay, thanks for that. Now, before we move on, does anybody want to add to the conversation so far? Do you want to pick up on what's been said so far? Okay, so shall we push on then? And we're at that part of the show now when we have a look at some recent media stories. And Matthew, you spotted 3 reports, or sustainability reports, I suppose. One from Carlisle, one from Lenovo, where they seem to have this curious habit of going on their sides all the time, and Dell. Yeah. So can you tell me more and explain what this has got to do with it? Well, it's obvious what it's got to do with ESG, the sustainability reports, but how this ties in with getting started.
Sure. So a couple, maybe 2 weeks ago, I started noticing that people were reporting that from the financial services perspective, ESG was kind of back. And I'm hypersensitive to this here in the US because there's obviously a big anti-ESG push. Last summer there was. So I started kind of tuning into what companies were saying about ESG, because again, I really like that corporate focus. And I noticed that 3 of my connections had posted their sustainability reports, Dell, Lenovo, and the Carlisle Group, as you called out. And so I decided to crack them open because, as we've discussed already today, a lot of times companies are saying different things about ESG and using different terminologies and definitions. And so when I opened them all, I found all 3 were very aligned with the way that we're defining ESG today. You know, materiality, long-term, focused on risks and opportunities. And if I could just unpack them very quickly, because I think they're worth reading if you're just getting started, because you can see what some of the bigger companies are doing. And it's not necessarily outside of the realm of possibility for companies of any size. Granted, if you're a smaller company, you're probably not going to publish a 100-page plus sustainability ESG report, but take these lessons away. So looking at Dell's, if you look at page 11 and 12, they talk about their material issues, and you can see how they really unpack them. And what was fascinating to me is there's many boilerplate materiality matrices out there. Dell's does not have carbon emissions, but has something called energy and climate change, which they're highly attuned to. So I would encourage you to check out Dell's if you're looking for kind of material guidance. Moving to Lenovo was also pretty interesting. What I found most interesting is that the pages on materiality and the pages on how they approach their governance match Dell's almost exactly. Like the page numbers are almost exactly aligned. Page 11, page 72 for the materiality and governance respectively. But I encourage you to read Lenovo's page 72 around how the board recognizes ESG and what their perspective is, because it can help you if you're trying to push from the bottom up, explain to the board what's going on and why they should focus on this. And lastly is the Carlisle Group, and I'll just cover this off as quick as I can. Carlisle was one of the first companies to recognize that anti-ESG pushback as a material risk in their 10K. I think it was 2 or 3 years ago. They have a really, really excellent ESG report that focuses on the definition that I subscribe to from an ESG perspective. And what they call out a little bit more is the dynamic nature of ESG, in that even though you might get started and kind of move through some ESG issues, it doesn't end there. You have to kind of restart ESG over and over because your issues might change. There could be geopolitical changes that require you to take new looks at things not aligned with your annual reporting cycle. So they have a really great lesson on dynamic materiality in their sustainability report. So if you're looking to get started, I encourage you to look at what others are doing, but lead with that lens towards materiality, towards long-term, towards risks and opportunities, because some ESG reports are not that. So if you find those, really look at them but don't read them for the metrics. Try to learn the lessons about how the companies have executed over time.
Okay, thanks for that, Matthew. So I suppose a good place to get started is to read the sustainability report from those three companies: Dell, Carlisle, and Lenovo.
There you go.
The company that walks around with its head to one side. Yeah. Okay. Robin. No, I beg your pardon. Petter's next. Petter, you spotted a piece on Bloomberg. AI obsession obscures a bigger promise of climate tech. Can you enlighten us?
Yes, well, I picked up this story because I think it is a topic that we're seeing a bit more and more of this as well. That of course there's so much going on in AI, so much happening there, and it's definitely a topic that is on everybody's agenda. And again, another topic where I think a lot of businesses know that they have to do something, but they don't know really where to start. And sometimes these topics of ESG and AI are sort of put up against each other as alternative ways of alternative things to invest in, which I think can be a little bit of a trap as well, because certainly AI is going to help us a lot on the ESG side going forward, and you see that happening already. I mean, you can use AI in your work on enhancing supply chain transparency, about using predictive analytics or risk assessments, and there's a whole lot of, there's like no limits to what you can use AI for in the context of ESG as well. And so I think it's important not to fall into this trap of sort of asking, should you be investing in AI or should you be investing in ESG? And you see that this is kind of driving to some extent, driving some investment priorities in a way that I think is a bit misguided at this point, because for lack of thorough understanding both of opportunities on the AI side as well as what really needs to happen on the ESG side, you kind of make this simplified decision of, okay, AI might be more important for us than ESG or vice versa, which is not really a helpful way of looking at it.
Okay, thanks for that. There's also, of course, the issue of ethical AI as well, which I suppose ties in with ESG. And also, I was reading a report the other day about ChatGPT. Oh, of course, Microsoft is closely connected with OpenAI, about how it. They were asking the question: does it hallucinate or does it bullshit? Is what the paper was asking. Because ChatGPT isn't always very accurate. I gather, a bit like politicians, I suppose. It lies. Anyhow, Robin, you spotted a piece on Reuters. Canada Oil Sands Group removes online content over federal anti-greenwashing rules. Can you tell us a little about that?
Yeah, and I think this comes back to your original premise, Mike, about ESG by design and using the GDPR as an example of a parallel. Yeah, this is absolutely about consumer protection. And I think that within ESG, there is this inherent consumer protection driver. And we've seen greenhouse gas emissions legislation become predominantly the main source of legislation, new legislation around the world. Now we're beginning to see greenwashing legislation rapidly catching up. And I think perhaps companies, when they do begin to sit down and consider their ESG reporting compliance issues, should probably not let the marketing department too close to it to start off with. Now, we're seeing lots and lots of new legislation, and the Green Claims Directive in Europe is probably the most substantial that's tabled for this year after the CSRD last year. And here, organizations are going to have to be very explicit about the components, to what extent are their products and services going to be positive, creating negative impacts, or creating positive impacts. And more importantly, they're going to have to substantiate, have verified information that their product performs significantly better than common practice if it's going to have a green claim. So I think that we're not just looking at ESG reporting and some form of compliance issues ticking the boxes. There has to be performance enhancement. There has to be some way of actually making, producing, managing, using a better product, both at its inception and during the lifetime of the product. Now, this legislation tsunami that this is all part of, I think is the green legislation is very much at the sort of the thin end of the wedge. Greenhouse gas emissions and greenwashing legislation, but there is much more besides as well. So how can companies be able to navigate this? I think this is a subject we're going to cover today. There's 1,186 new pieces of legislation just in the last 6 months around the world. And since this ESG, really since COVID, since it really began to get some traction, we're looking at over 36,000 pieces of legislation around the world over the last couple of years. So this is, I think, yeah, greenwashing is something that's close to home. It's something that your customers, your clients, and the companies are going to be able to identify with. But actually, there's much, much more besides, which is why I think it's such a hot story.
Okay, thanks for that, Robin. And Matthew, thank you for answering Dawn's question. I don't know how you can do that. I've attempted to comment while I'm doing the ESG show, and things go horrendously wrong when that happens. So thanks for doing that. We have actually had another question from Enoch. Some boards to date do not have ESG as part of their skills matrix, which creates the impression that they are unable to interrogate management ESG strategies and initiatives technically and wholly. Do you think that this translates to reducing the robustness of board inquisitiveness in addressing ESG issues at the board level? Anybody got thoughts on that question?
Yes, absolutely. The due diligence legislation is a third of the large bodies of new regulations and compliance issues that are rearing their head and are just around the corner. And if a board of directors is not up to speed, at least having someone on the board, preferably in some form of executive capacity, who does not have direct sustainability experience and ESG reporting knowledge base, then I think the board is going to be kept very much in the dark of what's important. So, yeah, I think as a board member's responsibility, this is something new, but as senior management as well. I would imagine there is wholesale rush at the moment for management schools around the world to have substantial ESG components in their MBA program.
Yeah.
So this is something that we're seeing is that it's going to have a long time, the legislation that comes in. And I think this is just the very beginning of it. So yes, absolutely.
Okay, thanks. Anybody else got anything? I know you're nodding your head there, Matthew.
Oh yeah. I mean, here in the US, there's been a string of, hey, you need boards to have this sort of experience. The SEC climate rule effectively doesn't say that, but it does say disclose when they do. Interestingly enough, the cybersecurity rule from the SEC also says that. I think there's a trend generally of an acknowledgement that the nature of business has changed, and that it's you can't just have a bunch of accountants on your board anymore. Like, you need to have a diverse set of experiences and expertise in some of these non-financial matters in order to make sure that your company is resilient for investors, for stakeholders, especially in this new world of AI. Like you mentioned earlier, these are not easy things to stand up and run. And there's a lot of ethics involved in running these, especially in certain sectors where stakeholders are key, like healthcare and education. So I think we're going to see, I think, more and more boards start to add this expertise, but I don't think we're near where we need to be yet.
I fully agree, and I think there's there's the requirements, formal requirements to the board that will be coming in the coming. It's starting to come in bigger companies, but it's also will be increasing gradually, quickly over the coming years. But then there's, of course, back to the whole point about the board should be proactively addressing all the business risks and opportunities of the company. That's at the heart of what they are there to do. And so not having an active engagement into ESG is not an option at all in the time to come. I think there might be many boards that are lagging behind a bit, but there is a lot of change to come there very, very soon.
Okay, thanks for that. Matthew, do you have any observations to make on the question from Dawn there? Can you weigh in on?
I will try to be as quick as I can. By the way, I'm not a lawyer, so please consult with a legal expert before you weigh in on the Chevron deference. So if you're not familiar, here in the US, there's been this Chevron deference, which refers to the fact that the laws we pass are not black and white, and that certain interpretations have to go to federal agencies in order to enforce, and that now the Supreme Court has said, well, no, that's not necessarily the case. The other day I was thinking about this in regards to ESG, and one of the things that came up was this fiduciary interpretation that the SEC has. So under the Trump administration, the Department of Labor, which manages our retirement plans, said that ESG is not part of a fiduciary responsibility. Therefore, it should not be a consideration in retirement plans. When Biden came in, the Department of Labor rolled that back and said, well, no, ESG can be a fiduciary consideration. And ultimately, it doesn't matter because it depends on what your interpretation of fiduciary is. But something like the Chevron deference would give federal agencies like the Department of Labor the right to say yes or no. I don't know how this is possibly enforceable anymore, because without these federal agencies in play, it is now incumbent upon Congress to pass exact laws, which I think is just untenable. And honestly, I don't know how it's going to play out, but it's just really discouraging to see.
So let's get this straight. The US Supreme Court has made a decision which doesn't completely make sense. I mean, there's a shock.
To me personally, this is Matt's personal opinion, by the way. But yes, I don't see how we can enforce really any laws, because Congress and judges, like, effectively, they're passing the judgment of these laws to judges who do not have the expertise, which is why we have federal agencies. So it's super. I have no idea how this is going to play out. I think not well. My answer is not well.
Right. Okay. All right. So shall we get on with getting started? We're only 10 minutes behind, which is pretty good for the ESG show, actually. Should we start at the beginning of how we get started? Why might an organization want ESG? I know we're to an extent talking to the converted on this show, but I think it's a useful exercise to rehearse, because we all get asked that question from time to time. Who wants to go first?
Well, I'm happy to go first, Michael. I think you, in many cases, you will hear that people are saying that we have to get started because we have to comply, and there are things that you will have to comply with, obviously. But I believe you need to get started because you need to secure the future of your business. You may need to make sure that your business is competitive in the long term. And being competitive in the long term is something that you do by understanding fully what kind of risks you are exposed to and what kind of opportunities you can take advantage of, and how you can use that towards your customers, and make sure that you build and grow your business sustainably. So it's all about securing your business for the future. It's not all, that you might be triggered into this at first because you have to comply with things that are requirements that are coming. But I would say keep in mind that at the end of the day, this is not really only about that's maybe a difference from the GDPR parallel that we had earlier, is that there is a lot of there are similarities and there are differences here, but they are, at the end of the day, it's about making sure your business is strong and future proof.
Yep.
Okay. Now I'm guessing that one of the first things you have to do when you are starting on ESG is to look at where your current state of play, to kind of do an audit of where the organization is at the moment. Is that true? And how do you do that?
I wouldn't necessarily begin with an audit, but it's certainly one of the first, you need to have a baseline, absolutely. But I think there's a few questions that need to come before you actually begin any ESG auditing process. Who's driving this process in the organization to start off with? At what level is it being driven? What resources are being allocated to it? And is this something that we're going to have to do it. Hey, there's someone down in accounting that's got a bit of spare time. We're going to put them in charge of it. I see quite a lot of that. I see a lot of people who are involved in maybe customer service or sales and marketing roles also getting involved with ESG management, because they think that's what the customers are interested in. So they want to try and find the right sort of answers and the right pitch to be able to be telling them. And then, where are the skills gaps? Because ESG is an enormous subject. It affects absolutely everything that you do and how you do it and where you get stuff and where it goes. And I don't think that you could really begin an audit with even remotely touching those three questions first.
Okay.
And we've already talked about board responsibility. That's who's responsible for it, who's culpable for it at the end of the day.
Yeah, if I could just add one quick thing.
Please,
watch out for delegation without sponsorship. A lot of executives will delegate this to some of the roles that Robin just said, but they don't actually empower them to mainstream it around the organization or to approach it with materiality. Very often here in the US, it's focused on just get the reporting out as fast as you can. So keep an eye out for that and be ready to defend why companies need it, to what Peta said earlier.
Okay, thanks for that. So beware of delegation without responsibility. Anybody else got anything to add before we push on? Okay, and how do we assign ownership of, delegate responsibility? How do we do that?
I personally think it's tough because it very often gets assigned to somebody who's not quite ready for it, doesn't have the skills, but is a really smart person in the organization, especially at like medium to smaller size companies. So if you're on a board, if you're part of the management team, really consider what the value is, whether it's not only financial value, but avoiding some sort of risk or capturing an opportunity. You may have to get uncomfortable with understanding intangible value, which frankly, you should already if you're a business leader, but you really have to think like, there is other value here in doing this work. I need to make sure that I'm, one, capitalizing on my employees' newfound sense of purpose, two, giving them direction around that purpose, because otherwise they'll be spinning up projects left and right that are not material or helping anything. And then three, kind of giving them the tools and resources they need to actually make sure that the business is building towards that resilience and long-term sustainability.
Matthew, it's your book.
Oh yeah,
ESG mindset. Come on.
You know what's so funny? You're totally right. It is building an ESG. It's doing all those things to build that mindset inside the organization. That's really you're totally right. Yes. I love it when other people say that back to me. It's the best.
Can I add a comment to what add a brief comment to what Matthew just said? I think it's important that the delegation trap, watch out for that, of course, and also the ownership needs to be in the top of the company. I personally believe it needs to be part of the top management team, and if it isn't, it's gonna lose steam. It's gonna go not have the backing, the resources, the leverage that is needed for it to be a priority. And it absolutely needs to be a strategic priority, and that means it needs to be owned there. And you can bring up talented people from around the organization to front this, and that's great. But if you are just assigning, sometimes you see some of the best people getting this responsibility but not the power to take it through, and then you're setting them up to fail. And so have the ownership in the top management team, and then involve people to make it happen.
Yeah, I must admit, I hear this quite often. Unless the people at the top are taking it seriously, then you've got a struggle. Okay, so one of the things people always say about ESG is that it's a long-term strategy. It's not anti-profit; it's pro-profit, but it's with more of a focus on the long term. But when you focus on the long term, you have to get there somehow. You have to survive in the short term in order to get to the long term. And I can't remember who it was that said. I think it might have been you, Robin. But it might have been. I can't remember. It might have been Matthew. It might have been Petter. Talk about thinking long term, but also into short. You need to think in terms of discrete targets to get there, which I suppose is a kind of minimal viable product, lean startup type of model. I can't remember who it was that said that to me, but does somebody want to build up on that point?
Well, I mean, it's what I've spent most of my time trying to write about in the book, that you don't really want an ESG book. And with Petter's book, it's something you could put on the desk because you have this methodology for implementing ESG transitioning in your organization. You've got a mindset which is never, ever going to stop being an issue. So Matthew's book's going to be there. And I figured that the space between them was the practical action. And that's what I've tried to work on and to focus on, that it's not something that you do once, it is something that you do all of the time. Yeah, it's not an annual reporting requirement. This is a daily action requirement to be able to make your organization work better. It goes on forever. So you start with the low-hanging fruit, just as you would any new product in any new market. When you're launching something, you're going to go for the low-hanging fruit and try and find the maximum impact to start off with. The high-hanging fruit don't go away; they're still there. So you've got to learn how to get to grips with some of the more difficult and gnarly aspects of your organization, which on a day-to-day basis, most organizations don't want to do. We have these nice blind spots, and we're hurtling down the freeway of making money, and what we want to do is just keep making that money and keep our foot on the pedal. But you don't know what's coming from the left and from the right. And at the moment, even if you try and think about this as being, well, there's a whole bunch of young lawyers who are coming through law school at the moment and they want to cut their teeth on something. Well, going for some dinosaurs in the commercial sector and nailing them with ESG issues is probably going to make their reputation very quickly. So I think that you need to find a way to motivate yourself for those low-hanging fruit, but remember that really you want to be working out how to crack the hard nut, both within your organization and also the issues of the organization.
Okay. All right. Then also, I think another issue is understanding your ecosystem and your place within the ecosystem. I suppose tied in that your supply chain. We had a guest on the show a few months ago who said that he considers the supply chain to be the wrong description. We shouldn't call it supply chain. We should call it the ecosystem. But maybe that's semantics. But understanding your position in the ecosystem, how important is that, and how do you do that?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in here. I think what I actually end up calling it is the value chain, because it goes upstream and downstream. So ecosystem, value chain. What's interesting about that particular point is that there are systemic challenges that exist in your value chain that others also have. It's their same challenges. This is largely your competitors, but also to your point, your suppliers in many cases. What I haven't seen, I've sort of seen this. There's a balance between, especially again here in the US, like antitrust issues and working with your competitors to lift an entire industry and address some of those systemic risks and opportunities. For example, forced labor is a huge issue globally that largely has not been resolved in any sort of significant manner. That involves working with not only your competitors, but with public-private partnerships with governments and monitors and auditors in order to really fix. And that isn't just a humanitarian crisis, that is a risk to your business, because forced labor, like if that is a critical part of your supply chain and it's there, it's not only reputational risk, but there is a lot of volatility in that is highly unpredictable, that could completely disrupt your supply chain. So really looking at that ecosystem with a closer lens, but also considering the ecosystem to help you solve those issues is something that I think every company would be a good focus for everybody.
Okay, all right, thank you for that. And where do people go wrong? What are the common mistakes do you think people make, especially in the early
How long have you
stages?
got, Mike?
Well, it'd be nice if you could finish by Christmas. Is that okay? So 6 months to answer this question. No, unfortunately, I can't give you more than a couple of minutes. But yeah,
I think the first thing is that organizations. Sorry, Mike. I think the first thing is organizations believe they have the institutional capacity to be able to do this without help.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, fine.
There's also the.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
No.
You often see that companies think that they have done a lot while they actually have done very little, because maybe they've had discussions, maybe they had a task force, maybe they got someone to write a report for them or whatever, but the real progress is lacking. Just one practical thing also that I want to mention, it relates to what was just said earlier by Matthew, is that and it relates to ecosystems and value chains, is that you might think, because you're in the small business, that these regulations and so on don't really apply to you. But chances are you are the part of someone's value chain, a bigger one that is already exposed to all these requirements for disclosure and documenting their entire value chain. So you are going to have to respond to this whether you like it or not, because you are part of someone else's value chain. And this is sometimes falls off the radar screen of some companies, and they are sort of brutally awakened to that fact.
If I could just add one more thing that I think people get really wrong: don't lock your sustainability information in its own data silo. And of course, I'm going to talk technology because I work at Microsoft. So many companies have their business systems kind of segmented like this, where nobody can see what everybody else is doing. Do not turn sustainability information into yet another silo. You really have to pull it alongside everything else and do that robust analysis if you're going to make the impactful change that we're trying to look for, whether it's your business or whether it's some sort of external impact that you're trying to make.
Okay, thank you for that. Dawn, I don't think we're going to have enough time to answer your question unless anyone can answer it super quickly. But in the absence of that, I was wondering whether someone could reply in the comments section, unless somebody feels they can answer this question super fast.
I'd say that the SBTI has been going through a whole raft of fairly strategic changes and direction reviews over the last 2 years, and I'm not surprised that it's happened. I think it is time for a refresh, and I think it's totally realistic.
Okay. Fair enough. All right. I mean, we really need to draw this to a close quite shortly. I thought what I'd do is bring up one more topic and then ask you all to have a sort of 30-second summary or 60-second summary, maybe. Measuring ESG. Any tips about measuring ESG and maybe bringing presumably technology plays an important role in that. Anyone got any observations to make about that?
Let's Microsoft go first.
Oh, sure. So what I'd say is don't rely on the regulatory frameworks and standards solely to uncover your material issues. You will find material issues that do not have metrics aligned to them, especially like a technology company, digital privacy, cybersecurity. Those don't have metrics in a regulation somewhere. So really think about your material issues and what data is going to inform an actionable decision that you can make or an actionable journey that you can take.
Yeah,
Okay.
I agree. And I think metrics, finding appropriate metrics, suitable metrics, is one of the hidden challenges in materiality testing. And that's, I think, going to be a burden for a lot of industries, a lot of companies for a long time until we start seeing some sort of industry standards and best practices coming out that are quite clearly defined.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, and yeah, just you need to have some metrics that are clearly linked to your priorities, and this is not this is back also to what both of you mentioned before, is that the materiality drives your priorities, and so figure out what is most important for you, both in order to risk with regard to the risk you're exposed to and the opportunities you want to go after with this, and follow those KPIs related to them. I mean, you could drown in KPIs as well and metrics, but focus on materiality, focus on your priorities.
Okay. Does anyone have an answer to David's question? It's a bit of a big question. I think we could spend a show on that one. Do you think we're going to see more conversations, actions, and regulations on the S in ESG? I suppose the EU's Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive puts a lot of emphasis on human rights in the supply chain. So that's a big S bit, I suppose. But
that's a big S bit, and there's also a whole lot of social influence on consumer behaviors and so on as well. And so this is a big topic that you could have for another episode, Michael. It's hard to answer that very briefly, but I definitely think that there will be an increased focus on that as well. And I think, as has been mentioned before also, that you cannot solve one of these without the influence of others.
Okay. So David, watch this space whilst we do an entire show dedicated to your question. What I thought I would do now, if that's okay with you guys, is ask you, you're in the elevator, the CEO steps in, it's not Steve Jobs, so you're not going to get fired or anything, and you've got 30 seconds, and just give me a piece of advice, please. Yeah, just one piece of advice. How do I get started with ESG? Who wants to go first on that?
Okay.
Go ahead, Robin.
I'm getting out the lift first, guys. Look, the type of information that's required in ESG reporting has got to have there's a whole bunch of characteristics that are associated with it to make sure that ultimately it's meaningful, okay? And that you are being able to communicate what you're doing, why you're doing it, how you're doing it, what you think is going to happen from doing it, etc., that it's all meaningful. And the most important part of that for me is faithful representation. And this is perhaps where the lawyers are going to get very excited, because you've got to take faithful representation seriously. If you think that going to your customer service department and asking them what they think your customers want, that's unlikely to be faithful representation. So you're going to have to make sure that your information chains, and I think that you're absolutely right, Matthew, siloing information is the last thing you want to be doing with this, because you need to propagate as much as possible through an organization to ensure that faithful representation has had the input of everyone, absolutely every stakeholder you possibly think of. If it's a material impact, you want to make sure you've got yourself covered. So I would say faithful representation is, at the end of the day, that probably is what's going to cause some of the biggest headaches for ESG compliance.
Thank you for that, Robin. Matthew, as you're kind of next on my computer view, would you want to go? Do you want to have a go at that one?
Yeah, funnily enough, I think what I do is I would have I see ESG in everything. And so when I look at even Microsoft's own internal issues, I very much see ESG everywhere. So if I got in the elevator with Satya, I would have some of those issues listed in my head. And I would say to him, like, hey, have you thought about this? I wouldn't even say ESG. Have you thought about this particular issue? I'm not going to get into any of the issues. But have you thought about looking at this from the perspective of the environment or the social? Because I haven't really seen us do anything on this yet. And what our long-term strategy might be around this, and start initiating the conversation from the business perspective and a particular issue, and then see where it goes.
All right, so Satya, you've been forewarned. You know what Matthew's going to talk about if ever you step in the elevator with him. What about you, Petter? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would ask the CEO in the elevator, what do you think are your top 3 risks and your top 3 opportunities related to this? And as Matthew just said, ESG is sort of part of everything now. But if you frame ESG as a topic, I would say, what are the top 3 risks and what are the top 3 opportunities you see in this area?
All right. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, everybody, to Robbie, Matthew, and Petter, and thank you everyone for watching. No show next week. We've actually we postponed ESG decision making. We're going to be doing that slightly later in the year, and then we'll be back the following week when we're discussing double materiality. But thank you everybody for joining, and see you all again soon.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.